epidemia para noyes diarrheales, which I must say made me stop reading. I'm a big horror fan and I'm not used to stop reading because I have to process what I just read.
Which is classic.
So congratulations. And next to him we've got Frances Hardinge, who's a British writer, mostly known for her children and young adult books, full of dark fantasy. Her books are now being translated into both Catalan and Spanish, and as far as I know, her latest book is El bosc dels mil ulls. Then we've got Ben Aaronovitch, who was with me yesterday just here. He's also a British writer and screenwriter. In Spain, he's mostly known for his series The Rivers of London, which is being published now by Oz. The latest one so far in Spanish is over there, which is, I think it's The Hangman, this one in Spanish. Because there's many more to come. And that will drop out, yeah. And finally, next to me, we've got Roger Luckhurst, who's a British professor at Griswick, the University of London, and he has a very clear focus on genre. From Zombies, a Cultural History, which is how I discovered him, which unfortunately has not been translated into Spanish, nor Catalan, so si algo le a Sara. To Gótico, La Historia Ilustrada, and his most recent book, which is over there, which is Cementerios, Tumbas y Sepulturas, both of which, I must say, are not only excellent books in their content, but also physically, they are gorgeous editions. And now that we're done with this, let's go to Vamos allá, in Spanish. First of all, I would like to ask you about the persistence of the past and its weight in your books. Our cities and countries seem to be host to graveyards. Actually, our whole continent, and in our case, and all of your country, are built over a big graveyard. Everywhere you go. I mean, I like it when in American movies they say, oh, there was an Indian cemetery here. Your whole country is an Indian cemetery. So, do you find that the Fantástico is perhaps a good way to dialogue with this past?
May I just say, their whole country is not an Indian cemetery. My whole country is an Indian cemetery. Don't give them my sins. I think horror is about the return of the repressed. It's the things you can't forget. So yes, of course, it's always about the past crime you wish people would forget. The embarrassing moments, the dead bodies.
I think it's an excellent resource for getting that extra 500 words. So, you go out and do some research and you go, aha, that's 500 words, that's a day's work, and you're done, and you can go home. Or, well, in my case, you can move from your office to your bedroom.
I am not so good at stopping. I love historical research. In fact, I disappear down rabbit holes of research into a wonderland of weird facts and don't surface for months and discover things like, Victorian post-mortem photography and carriages that were pulled by kites and other things, and secret messages being hidden by spies inside eggs and come back cackling and trying to force them on readers.
I knew about the eggs and the post-mortem. I've never heard of the kites.
It was called the Charveron.
Okay.
Basically, there was this guy who invented a carriage that could be pulled by kites because the local toll bridge charged you according to the number of horses you had.
Yes, I think we were talking just earlier about living in London and how this is kind of completely unavoidable, and everyone can do that in a street in London. So my street is in the Doomsday Book, 1066, but also it was a place where Alfred Hitchcock used to go drinking after he'd finished filming in the 20s and 30s, and has 9 graveyards in it as well. So that kind of sense of just the layering we were talking about of this, I think, is constant. So there's a certain sense in which British culture has produced the Gothic for a kind of, I guess, that sense of a horrible past coming back, or an anxious past coming back. It was invented by Horace Walpole in the 1760s because he had to run away from London because someone had called him out for his past sins and accused him of being my favourite ever term of abuse, a hermaphroditic horse.
Ooh. I mean, you do research and you find things like, for example, Southwark. Right? Southwark is the second largest, oldest bit of London. Okay, so you go across to Southwark. Southwark was where everything that you didn't want to be in the bounds of a respectable city got stuck, like the theatres, the bare bits, but also the prostitutes. And the prostitutes used to work out of brothels that were owned by I think it was the Bishop of Winchester. And so therefore prostitutes were called Winchester geese, because they were run by, and this is the bishop, by the way, of Winchester, not like a friend of the Bishop of Winchester, but the actual Bishop of Winchester ran the brothels. And you just find that out and you just go, how can I get that in a book? I've got to get that in a book. I've got to get that kind of somewhere.
You guys have better educations than I do. What was the name of the Gothic press in the early 19th century? It was in all the Linding libraries. People spoke out against it a lot. It printed all the Gothic novels.
The Minerva?
Minerva, yes.
Okay.
Because I was going to say, thank you, I will borrow your education. But, also though, horror is about the present. When Gothic literature was huge and so many of these novels were getting published in the 19th century, all these critics said, oh, these are garbage. These know nothing about reality. The Minerva press is just a sewer. And it's just for a bunch of women to write these books, and they will be read by hairdressers, and they will gossip about them. And yet you look at these books, and they are almost always about an older man trying to kidnap, rape, abuse a younger woman. She is being tortured or tormented or isolated, somehow cut off from the world. And these were written by men, but also by women who were often married to alcoholic men who spent all the money. And they had titles like The Secret, Find It Out, or The Hell Inside a Family. And this was not fantasy, I think. This was for these women. They were writing through fiction, through the exaggeration of the Gothic, something they understood. I mean, what was the name of Mary Shelley, her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft's Gothic novel? She never finished. About the woman confined to the asylum because her husband wants to have an affair, so he just gets her sent to an asylum. And she never finished it. But, I think a male critic or a male writer who she knew said, oh, I found your book so fanciful. And she said, again, this is a reminder to me that unfortunately you are a man.
Well, it's also interesting because you talk about Gothic, you talk about the Gothic imagination, you think, oh, it's all castles. But Mary Shelley was living in a castle on the side of Lake Geneva with a bunch of weirdos. So how Gothic was that? I mean, how Gothic was her life?
Like they were doing Gothic properly.
Yes, no, properly Gothic.
Yes.
When they invented this idea of the women's hysteria, the reason was that so many women came and talked about being abused and that it was not possible. I mean, not every woman got, well, it's fucking true, it can. I want to talk about death. Now and in general. It's going to come to all of us. And I think it's a central motive in your books. Not necessarily clearly, but it's always there, like lurking within the pages. Some authors talk about the pornography of death, meaning it's not exactly Philippe, but in general, like we've hidden it from us and from our lives. It's more complicated than this, but let's keep it with this. Do you think that perhaps the rise of horror and dark fantasy and even grimdark in our times is a way to cope with it, maybe to sublimate it?
No. No, maybe because horror goes in and out of fashion. It doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing with death at the time. I mean, it came in, when I was growing up, you couldn't move for Frank Herbert books and early Stephen King, and then suddenly the whole horror section of bookshops and libraries just disappeared. And it was like, there's no horror. And then it all came back. And it was like, okay, now there's horror again. But it was slightly different. We got splatterpunk and things like that. And then suddenly we're doing horror movies going in and out of fashion. I mean, I remember the first wave of slasher movies, and now we're into the fifth wave of slasher movies. And I think it deals with universal themes. I don't think it's got to do with our particular cultural motive. I think it just deals with the kind of universal things that we bury because we don't want to die.
I think horror is incredibly varied as well. So I think splatterpunk, in a way, it is a way of dealing with death but almost by cartoonifying it, by making it feel less real. But you do have a number of really psychological horror movies, particularly actually over the last few years. So the last while. So for example, Babadook is about grief. It is about following somebody who is processing death. So it's very hard to generalize.
I think what is very popular right now is putting the subtext as the text. I think now in horror, what has become very, and I'm not sure for writers, but I think for audiences and for critics, and definitely filmmakers, you will see a remake of a horror movie where this horror movie had a sort of like feminist slant or a slant that dealt with grief, and now that is the entire story. It's like people have discovered that people used to have sex. They're very excited with this discovery that horror has always had a subtext. And so it's nice, but the subtext has become the text, and I think that's a very modern thing.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there's a sense in which the genre always operates, I think, with a dream logic. So that means it can turn into its opposite at any point. And so you can have a very explicit set of horror films going on. If anyone's seen Bring Her Back, that is also about grief, but it's also about eating a corpse. And that's a sense of it being really, really kind of body horror stuff. But there's also, of course, a trend for quiet horror, and even, banal or kind of bland spaces that don't have a history. So the reverse of what we were just saying. Horror Store, all of that idea of these very modern places being haunted precisely because they don't have a history. There's nothing to say about them. So I think you can always think about an opposite. And in that sense, I think that's why it keeps going. Sometimes it falls out of fashion, but actually there's a sense in which it keeps riding and coming back, and has done for 200 years.
It's actually...
Sorry, I was just thinking of Peter F. Hamilton, who does this huge space opera horror. Reality Dysfunction is like 5,000 pages of horror tropes in a space opera.
Yeah.
And it works really well. I remember reading this can't possibly be what I think it is. Yeah, it was totally what I was thinking it was. It was a horror, it was a 5,000 page horror movie. I mean, it was just really brilliant, but there you go. I mean, that's just, that shows you how flexible the genre is.
Well, it's funny, but this is your expertise, not mine, but liminal spaces, like you're saying, are very popular right now. It's in between. It's not here, it's not there. I worked for a parapsychological library for a very long time, and a lot of the ghost stories, the ghost is on the stairs, the ghost is in the hallway, it's in the in-between rooms, it's not in the living room, it's not in the kitchen, it's not in the bedroom, it's on the in-between spaces. But what you're saying is very interesting, because in early horror, the in-between space was the woods. It was the suburbs, outside of Athens, on the road. But now the liminal space is constructed. It's man-made. Like you said, it has no connection to nature. It has no connection to history. It's entirely a sealed-off bubble.
Yeah. So you get to something like Severance, which is entirely about corridors and nothing else. It's that kind of bland corporate space that is truly horrifying.
There's a book called The Way In spelt I-N-N.
Brilliant book.
Yes. I've forgotten the name of the author.
Will Wilde.
Yes, that's it. Which I love, and which is absolutely set in one of these liminal, very modern, very soulless spaces. It's a chain hotel. And as it turns out, these chain hotels are all sort of connected to each other. And because they are places that nobody gives any thought to, it turns out they house some quite unpleasant things.
Including the art.
You've done book tours, right? Book tours. Isn't there that moment when you're in a hotel and you come out your room and you think, what city am I in? It all looks the same. What country am I in? What time is it? It's very disorienting.
It's funny that you mentioned, because I wanted to ask you about the known places, the places of transit, because I think they are very important in your books. I mean, obviously, if there's a place which is not supposed to be lived by people, it's a cemetery. But we talked yesterday that, yeah, you go to El Cairo and there's about 500,000 people living in the cemetery, right, in theory. But these places of passage, like your whole last novel is actually going from one place to another place and being in places that are not anymore what they used to be. And your last novel is also in a place where girls go just for a few months and then leave for never to return. So known places are. And I was thinking, I'm not sure whether it's in your works or it's in dark fantasy and horror in general. I think what you are talking maybe was in this sense.
I think there is generally a liminal spaces are places where the divides break down. People like divides because they are the rules that keep the world safe. You know, the divide between living and dead, between past and present, between human and animal, and so forth. Liminal spaces are not quite one thing or another, so it feels like, it's like liminal times, sunset, midnight, dawn. Those feel like times when the rules and divisions can be soft. And these things that these pillars and borders that we count on can crumble or buckle, or one can fall through them.
Because I'm not a horror writer, so, you know, I have a slightly more optimistic view of the universe. So for me, liminal spaces are places of opportunity. Liminal spaces are where you go and find things out, where you move from one state and find you're in another state and you can move on and go, because you know, I'm, like I said, I'm an optimist. So I always like cities. For me, cities are liminal spaces. In London, traditionally, if we're talking about the past, I think traditionally London, you came to London and you lived there for a year and a day, you were free of any obligation to do as a serf. If you were a serf, you came to London, or a slave, you came to London, you lived there for a year and a day, you became a free man in London. Now, you were probably dead poor and going to die soon, but you were a free man in London. Yeah, that opportunity was open to you. Like death by starvation.
But I think there is an optimistic read on the liminal space. I mean, you think about how trans people, or dressing as someone of the opposite gender, is often used by shaman or in ritual magic, because you are now neither male nor female. You are somewhere in between, which makes you more powerful, or makes you more invisible.
Yeah, and also, you know, most of the big cities of the world are ports in one way or another, even if they're inland, right? And so they're ports are the most definite liminal spaces, the points of opportunity, points of arrival, points of departure. And in a weird way, airports are like that. You know, they've got to be the most terrible liminal spaces of all. But they are still points of departure, and train stations. And all of these places are places of opportunity, as well as danger and horror. And that's why I think there's so many stories about them, not just horror stories, but fantasy stories, but also crime stories and romance stories. You think of, you know, Strangers on a Train. That you got one where, you know, 1940s one where he gets something in his eye, and I can't remember the name of the film. The 1940s film where he's a doctor and she's a
spellbound,
and she has something in her.
Brief Encounter.
Brief Encounter.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, I mean, actually, the bloody title. I don't know why I forgot the title. The title sums up my thesis, right? It's like, and you know, and it's just a play. And also, but I'm also interested in the people who live in those liminal spaces, like in Brief Encounter, the people that run the tea shop that they meet in on the station, and they have their own lives. And the film is very careful to show that they have their own lives and routines that have nothing to do with this doomed couple. And I find that very interesting. I've got nothing really profound to say about it apart from that, really.
But I do absolutely agree. The points where the walls are breaking down aren't just doomy and terrifying, but you know, borders breaking, walls breaking is also liberating. It's also energizing. Like you say, there is the opportunity. So they are kind of exciting spaces.
Yeah, there's a whole obsession with what are called extraterritorial spaces as well. So that's a sense in which a border is no longer a line, but has kind of expanded. If you work at a university in the UK, that's where a border runs through your classroom because you have to do all the checking on that your international students are not terrorists anymore. All of that stuff is happening, and borders are expanding. These spaces like airports are kind of expanding. As you say, they become places of opportunity. I'm thinking about Christopher Priest's last novel, which was called Airside, where people could just keep going through, checking, and then just vanishing, airside. No one quite knows where they've gone, and it's full of possibility. It could be a horror story, but it could also be a science fiction story. It could be travelling in time or space. It's very kind of full of that potential. So, I mean, having been brought up reading J.G. Ballard, all transitional spaces are, places where there's inevitably going to be a psychotic breakdown at some point. But there are other narratives, I think, alchemy, shamanism, as you say.
I think we're much better at navigating these places than we think we are. I mean, I think we think we're people who can't navigate liminal places, but we all go to the beach, which is one of the most liminal places you can get. We hang out on the beach, totally happy, swimming in, out. No, we're not thinking, oh my God, existential dread. I might be drowning.
But I also think when you were saying that about how you're not a horror writer, and so it means something very different to you, I think that's really interesting because I think people talk about horror as if it is a negative sometimes. And for me, because people always ask, why do you write horror? Which translated means, why are you so weird? And you think about this a lot, and I realize, but everyone likes horror. Everyone likes to be scared on some level. If it's not the roller coaster, it's a first date, or it's going to another country and speaking the language for the first time, or delivering a presentation. We call these different things nervousness, anticipation, but the different words is like erotica versus pornography. It's all fear. It's all fear. And so I feel like there's an aspect of fear which means you're doing something new. This is new. And I think that's not the terror of horror, but the promise of horror is this will be new. This will be something interesting. Cronenberg, all about the new body, the new flesh. Even J.G. Ballard, I feel like a new society growing here. A car crash does not have to be the end of life. It could just be a horny interlude.
And just one thing, you say you're an optimist. Do you really have a body count? Because I mean,
I've had whole books where no one's died. At least one. But
it's a weird way to be an optimist.
no, I've had 2 books where no one died. That's not bad out of 15 books.
I'm trying to think whether I've got any books where nobody died.
But that's the whole death thing, if we're going to talk about it. Death thing, the reason why the detective is always investigating a murder is not because that's the most horrible thing, but because it gives you the detective's moral authority in order to go into other people's lives and fuck them about. And that's basically what the detective's role in a story is. In some ways, the detective, if you're going to involute this, is the detective is the liminal space. The detective is the person who goes in and creates the liminal space within a closed society. I mean, you can see that in the Knives Out films, where Benoit Blanc turns up and just like involutes these kind of safe spaces that people have constructed around themselves. And the certainties, it's in the accidental death of an anarchist. It's in the Inspector Calls, which is the example of it. And it's always made because that's the one that gives you do not get that moral authority from shoplifting. Hi, you stole 58 pence worth of briskets, I'm going to turn your life upside.
Well, there was always that pivotal scene in every crime story where someone shows up to interview an important person, and the receptionist or secretary or someone tries to say, oh, go away, and they say, we are investigating a murder.
Yeah.
Go right in.
It's also a really good shorthand if you're bored of writing that scene.
It's funny that you mentioned moral, because you have a fluid relation with morals in your books. I mean, for example, in The Forest, the whole story is because she doesn't want to confront her people and say, yeah, I was tricked and somebody stole. And at one point she's considering murdering. So it's really to kill somebody a lesser evil than to steal something. And also the witches in witchcraft is there's this moment where they have to decide what the witches can do to me is really worse than what the ordinary real world is doing to me. So and I think you're not really always conscious of how you're dealing with these morals. Or am I wrong? Do you take a stand before and then you write a story?
I like to keep the morals grey, or at least complicated, because actually ethics in the real world is extremely complicated. And yes, I'm writing for younger readers, but I think presenting things as important as that oversimplistically is not only patronising, but it's misleading and a disservice. So I like to show people in the throes of moral dilemmas that genuinely are complicated. I want even my villains, my less positive characters, to be able to justify themselves to themselves. And I want the reader to see how they do that. Because their rationale has to be convincing enough that they can have convinced themselves. So yeah, I don't want the morals to be easy or pat in my books.
I mean, for me it's difficult because I always feel like I make the donuts, I don't eat the donuts. So feeling how a reader reacts to it, I'm always a little bit, it's confusing because as a writer, I have to understand every character and they have to be explainable, understandable to me. I have to sympathize with all of them. And I know there are some authors who don't, it's great, I wish I did. But so even a horrible character, to me, I'm like, I wrote about a killer puppet. And for most people, a killer puppet is beyond forgiveness. And it breaks my heart when people don't like this character because I feel like he's just misunderstood. He's a puppet. What do you expect? His knowledge of good and evil is a little, it's skewed. So I feel like I have to understand them and sympathize with them to write them, but maybe they seem good or evil to the reader. Great. That's my cowardly response.
I mean, and as a genre, I guess it's all about ambiguity, isn't it? So the whole negative reception of the Gothic to start with was always about this is completely disgusting, and where can I get some more? That kind of sense of I'm appalled and I want more. But that's the same with something like Dracula, isn't it? The kind of the classic Byronic kind of villain who is also something that's hugely sexually attractive to many of the victims. Yes, please. So that kind of sense of being in a place of ambiguity, I think, is crucial to the Gothic and to horror as well as fantasy. I mean, the fantasy hero is always an ambiguous figure too.
And I think that's baked into the vampire as well. I mean, John Polidori, when he wrote The Vampire, by anyone's estimate, Lord Byron was a terrible, amoral, horrible human being. And Polidori hated him, but he loved him and wanted to be accepted by him as well. So when he turned him into a vampire for his story, I think that ambiguity was already there.
I seem to be the lucky one out. I deliberately created a character with a moral compass, a very strong moral compass, because I was fed up with all these morally compromised police officers. I was just so sick of them sitting there with their drink and their failed marriages and their middle-aged angst, and I just thought, fuck it, I'll do someone who's young, keen, and ready to do battle for justice, and that's where he came from. Now, yeah, I admit quite a lot of my other characters are more morally compromised than a bag full of chips, but Peter Grant, I gave him a moral center because he was basically a reaction against a lot of stereotypes that had been flown. I mean, you had to be watching television when I was watching television, like Resnick, Rebus, oh my god, they were so boringly self-interested, and the Scandinavians don't get me started. And Icelandic detectives who can't even get out of bed. And it just really annoyed me. So I wrote someone who was young and vital and didn't do that. And I wasn't really thinking in terms of like, this is a great moral crusade. I was just thinking, I want to do that. And then, because all the other characters are completely morally compromised, he just really stands out.
Do you have more fun writing him or the morally
Oh
compromised?
no, I had more fun writing him because he's funny. If he wasn't sarcastic, he'd be boring as shit. So, but the sarcasm saves him, I reckon. Plus the fact, the surprise factor. Everyone's always really surprised when he does something like uphold the European, directives on human rights. Everyone's like, what? And then it's like, yeah, what are you talking about? In it.
It's not the case of Peter, but many of your characters are, I won't say misfits, but tend to be a bit of outsiders. Beginning with ghosts, for example. I mean, you're not even alive. You're not really part of this world, but at the same time, yeah, you are. And all of you, and I think all of the genre has a bit of a fascination with the outsiders, the liminal characters, in a sense. And I mean, you started with zombies, which are not alive nor dead. I mean, we don't even, like we always say, it's a zombie, no, it's an infected, oh, fuck off. But, and I think, I was thinking, do you think that maybe readers, general readers, love this because we tend to be a bit of outsiders ourselves? Or is it not like that anymore, and I'm just old?
Judging from how popular Nightingale is, I don't think they are keen on outsiders. I think they like posh guys with a bad past. As far as I can tell. That's my most popular character is a person who's like, posh, out of time, quasi-Edwardian gentleman with lots of power who lives in a big house. I don't know. I see. I'm from London, the city of outsiders, the pick and mix cultural capital of the world. I have characters who are the river goddesses. They don't think of themselves as outsiders. They are the centre of the universe, and the rest of the universe flows around them. And so that's how they see themselves, and that's how I see them. So, but outsiders are very important. We all are outsiders because we all secretly feel that we don't belong. So I suppose there's that. That's a bit depressing. So I'd rather write about something else.
I think a lot of my characters are. A lot of my characters are sort of, well, obviously my protagonists are all quite young, but they're often people that don't quite fit in or are slightly underestimated, or I've got at least two young protagonists, so two main characters in one book who are basically con artists and petty criminals living off their wits on a small island. So they're very much they're sort of living in the cracks, and those do seem to appeal. Those do seem to be popular, but so do the characters who aren't obviously outsiders, but who are underestimated, who have an intense inner life that is not fitting with the role that is being forced on them, or that they are expected to fulfill. I've got a number of characters like that, and these seem to strike a chord.
I also object to you calling ghosts outsiders. Statistically, they outnumber us. So we're the outsiders, and we all join their group eventually.
Yeah, I mean, again, the genre of writing throws up so many different possibilities. So I think, the vampire is always, for example, is always full of moral ambiguity. I think they can make decisions all the time, but I'm not sure that zombies can or are able to, and they come as a mass, and they come purely as an urge, as a desire, and there isn't a kind of sense of that thrilling corruption that is an essential part of vampirism, I think. So I think it really depends, and ghosts can be so varied, and they can do so many different, perform so many different kind of roles, I think.
What about you? Do you feel like you are outsiders? Because when I checked all your books and your studies, I said, fuck, I think it's going to be like a weirdo in the academia. Because I remember when I made my master's on zombie narratives, everybody said, why don't you study Borges or Proust or something serious?
Sure.
And you're studying zombies, gothic, cemeteries, and all of you now are established writers, to name and stuff. But have you ever felt overlooked by literary authors? I hate that word.
I hate the fuckers. No, I hate the fuckers for a very practical reason, is I'm fucking subsidising them, and that pisses me off big time. Now, all us commercial fiction writers, we are the ones that earn all the money, that get given huge advances to people who spend 10 years writing a book about their mothers and 40, and we end up win a Booker Prize, sell 40,000 copies, have a film made out of it, and they're never fucking heard of again. And I've subsidised their advance of $500,000, right? And they didn't make that back. I'm the one slogging my guts out. So personally, I have a lot of animus. So it's a class hatred, basically. I have class hatred for it.
I'm in a position where I'm a children's and YA author, and I'm a fantasy writer, and these are both classifications that some people will be slightly sniffy about. We'll say things like, so when are you going to write an adult book? Or, so are you going to keep writing? Oh yes, my favourite is sometimes people who have decided they do like one of my books will say things like, well, you're only technically fantasy. I feel that book sort of transcended fantasy. No, it didn't. No, it's, you liked a fantasy book. Except that you liked a fantasy book. So yes, I feel slightly defensive. Well, sorry, I want to defend, protective over the two categories I belong to.
It's like the definition of magic realism, which is the definition of magic realism, as far as concerned, is a fantasy writer called Juan. There you go. If you're called Juan, what you're writing is magic realism.
Yeah, I just read today the plot synopses of the Booker nominees, and some of them feel like a parody. There is one that's, a lonely teenage boy moves to a depressing apartment complex where he meets an old, ugly woman and has a lonely sexual affair with her. Who wants to read this? It's like a joke. But I think two things that have happened in genre that are, I think, really interesting. One is YA, because I think there's always been a split with booksellers, with publishing, with critics. Books they feel like you should be reading, and we all should be reading, and books we want to be reading. And I think people want to be reading genre largely, romance, fantasy, horror, and they feel like they should be reading Booker nominees. And I think the rise of YA changed that a huge amount, because YA was allowed to go so far with genre, and editors saw how much money they could make from it. And so I think that loosened up for adult fiction what you were kind of allowed to do, or what editors would accept, or realized readers would accept. And the other thing I think is the pandemic. I saw so many independent bookstores realize that they had to stay in business, which meant their romance section is going to grow. Their horror section is going to grow. Their fantasy section, these are all going to get bigger, because that's what people keep coming in and asking for. So I think it's changing, but not fast enough.
I mean, isn't it the case that about most literary novels in hardback sell about 250 copies? I think in the UK.
Is that really?
It's really like tiny. It's very, very tiny.
And when they don't, they're actually genre novels in this country.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
Yeah.
the big thick one about Henry VIII. That's a history.
Hilary Mantel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hilary Mantel. Those are historical novels.
Totally.
Just have, with a few quills
Yeah.
on them.
Well, and then you watch literary novelists struggle when they're called genre. I think Hilary Mantel for a long time struggled with being called a writer of historical fiction, because she felt like that was denigrating. Margaret Atwood, it's speculative fiction, not science fiction.
J.G. Ballard.
J.G. Ballard as well, yeah. And then when Ishiguro wrote a fantasy novel, The Buried Giant,
Right.
which is a pure fantasy novel, he actually stopped for 10 years because his agent was saying, what the hell are you doing? You can't do this, you can't possibly do this. Well, I've got a Nobel Prize, so I can do what the hell I like now. So there's that. In terms of outsiders, though, for academia, every academic thinks they're an outsider. They're cruelly misunderstood. And the wounded narcissism is entirely in inverse proportion to the amount of books they sell, which is usually about 10. So there's that. In fact, this book I wrote on cemeteries, the most horrifying cemetery I discovered in their research was one at the University College called Williamsburg, where if you're a faculty member, you get a grave spot for you in a little grove on the campus. You imagine you would carry on your faculty meetings for eternity. There's no fucking way I'm being buried there.
I used to walk past Karl Marx. I used to walk past Highgate Cemetery where Karl Marx lives. On my way to school, primary school was up the road, I used to walk past him. Douglas Adams is buried about 5 feet further on. So I just like the idea of Highgate Cemetery having both Douglas Adams and Karl Marx.
Next to each other.
Yes.
Well, they're not that close, but it's very amazing because nobody gets buried in Highgate Cemetery. I don't know how he wrangled it.
Oh, you can. No, you can now. They've opened it, reopened it for burials again.
Oh, wow.
So I was there recently, and we were doing a little short film for the publishers, and then we realised we were standing next to Litvinenko's grave. He was poisoned with polonium and had to be buried in a lead-lined coffin. So we moved quite quickly.
Highgate used to be where the Soviet Union's Trade Commission used to be. And we used to run. I used to live around there, and you used to run into people in hats, and that was funny. Anyway.
I've got to read your cemetery book, and I'm sorry I haven't because I feel like people are so strange about cemeteries. I was just at a funeral, and this church in a very nice section of the town I grew up in, it's out of room. And my uncle had just died, and my aunt was saying, oh, well, I'm going to be buried here too. And we were kind of like, how? And she said, no, if you're married to someone, they'll allow you to be buried on top of them. But I thought, only if you're married to them? Necrophilia is okay for the two of you, but only if you were married.
Is that America? Because we've got lots of land. You're burying like 7 or 8 people on top of each other, like standard practice by the 19th century.
Oh, that is far too slutty for Americans.
When they were doing HS2, because I'm involved with MOLA, which is an archaeological people, and they did one of the largest archaeological projects was they were building HS2 at both ends, one end at Birmingham, one end at London. They were basically excavating an entire missing cemetery. There was a missing cemetery in the Birmingham end and a missing cemetery. And they were finding quite famous people that no one had known where they went. And they were just like going, oh my God, this is this guy. And they would like do this potted biography of how they'd gone to the South Pole and they'd been a famous explorer. And like they were buried in the cemetery and then lost. And I just thought that's a great testament to railway engineering.
We lost a king under a car park.
Yeah, oh, yes.
It was Richard, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he did have a fucking spinal formation.
But this is what you were saying about, cities are built on top of the dead. I mean, you find these graves everywhere, every time where I grew up. They're building a new parking lot or something, they discover it's a graveyard of enslaved people. Just all over. We're walking on a carpet. Yeah.
Wall Street's built on a graveyard, the other graveyard. No, it makes sense, really.
There's the biggest metro stop in Washington, D.C. had a black cemetery with all these famous people in it moved to build the metro stop. And then that cemetery many years later had to be moved again, and they discovered they only moved the headstones and a few coffins. And so there are apparently close to a little over 1,000 coffins just all around this metro station. Dead people are everywhere.
But speaking
Yes, this was Poltergeist.
Yes.
But speaking of metro station, if you when they were building the metro in Athens, it took them years because every time they would dig like 2 meters, they would uncover enough archaeology to fill the entire museum, and they had to build a new museum just to fill up with the archaeology they were getting out of the sections of the tunnel. And that's really building on history, that is.
Yeah, and the great thing about the HS2, this big railway thing, in London, I think they found a medieval graveyard that really annoyed the right wing, didn't it? Because it was full of a diverse population and people from Africa and Middle East and so on. It's very, very annoying for this this kind of narrative of racial purity that
It's like
being
a thought city.
History is very annoying.
it is.
Close to here we have Tarragona, which used to be the capital of the Roman region. And it's been occupied and people have been living there for thousands of years now. And if you try to do anything there, whatever, you're going to find some Roman temple, some Middle Ages church. It's impossible to do anything in Tarragona. So it's a fucking expensive city. And there's not so many people living there. But it's just, we've been living there and dying there for minutes here. We have time for a quick question, or maybe even two. I'm not seeing anybody. And if you are shy, I'm going to keep asking myself. Okay, I give you the opportunity. Francis, before you go, because I need to ask you this. Your work has grown darker and more structurally ambitious over time. From Fly by Night to Island of Whispers, for example. What has driven this evolution? And to the rest of you, it's an easy and quick question. How has your own relationship with genre changed across your career from your first books? And in Grady, it's easy because your first book, Bad Astronauts, was science fiction and humor, and now you are with pregnant teenage girls, so it's a bit of a change. But
I think in my case, the simple answer is I am a very contrary person, and I always want to do new things, and I never want people to do what people have got in the habit of expecting. This is true whenever I'm writing an individual book, but also I like my books to be different from each other. I am horribly extravagant with settings. I will create one, write a story in it, throw it away, and then create a new one. But yes, me writing some stories that are perhaps darker and a little older, more ambitious, is not so much a planned progress as something else I wanted to try. The same goes for the illustrated books, the more recent, shorter illustrated books. Something new I wanted to try. I always feel my books and the process of writing them should scare me a little bit.
I'm with you. I'm always jealous of your series because it seems so mature that you want to write, you know, you have a character you like enough to write a lot of books about them. I wish I could do this, but I'm with you. I have a low attention span and I just throw it away and go somewhere else. But yeah, so I'm always impressed by people who write series.
Well, I mean, horror is the problem with horror is you can't have characters who you know are going to make it to the end of the story. That's part of the problem with the horror. I mean, in a way, one of the definitions of horror is you do not know that the main character is going to live at the end, right? Whereas I know my main characters because they'll come around and beat me up if I don't make them live to the end. I'm a slave to my characters. I go where they go. I keep thinking, oh well, that's probably it for this series, and then they go, oh, and then we do this, and I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake. And then characters come back. I get rid of them and they come back and I go, ugh. So, you know, I'm basically just trying to expand the world fast enough to keep it's Lebensraum really for my characters, basically, my world. So.
Yeah, it's like a whole series of chrysalises, isn't it? So you write one thing and then something crawls out of it, and that turns into something else, and then becomes and that. Yeah, sorry, I'm a horror person. And that kind of sense of, you know, you're
breaks out their chest.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, constantly kind of modulating and shifting. So you have kind of one idea, and then you think, as you say, you think you've kind of dealt with it, but something of that crawls out and becomes something else.
I think the best example for me is Bloody Foxes, which you really haven't got into in the Spanish editions yet. But I created like Foxes as a one-line joke in one book, and then the next thing I know, I've got foxes everywhere. So rather like London, actually, I have foxes everywhere. And I just went, where did these foxes come from? And why are you in my book? And then, you know, I don't know.
I had an opposite problem in Brujeria. I had in mini drafts a talking rabbit, a familiar, who was a real asshole. And ultimately I decided it was too silly and wrote him out. And that was about a year ago. I see rabbits everywhere. The hotel room will have a painting of a rabbit on the wall. I'm in a bar, drunk, and I look and there's a poster with a rabbit. It's haunting me.
Yeah, just write the bloody book with the rabbit.
Purge.
Well, perhaps it is.
The demonic rabbit.
There's a great,
Is that it in Spain?
the Monty Python's rabbit.
There's also a great film called Starvaker, which is about a kind of finding a skeleton of a hare that sort of then grows backwards back into life, and is an amazing. It's a nasty novel and not a bad adaptation actually. It's really good.
And I want to point out, even though it's my fault, I come on a panel about horror and fantasy and we're talking about rabbits. Like,
That's good.
They're fucking scary. And last call for alcohol. There's a question over there. If it's quick, maybe we'll have the other one.
Just wanted to comment, there's this great movie, which is this really terrible horror movie, Night of the Lepus.
oh yes. Oh, I've seen it, yes.
Fantastic, yeah.
Night of that?
It's so scary.
Lepus.
Rabbits.
It's,
Aaronovitch.
Australian.
Yeah.
Where rabbits are a real problem. And that's
Yeah.
it's wondering on the rabbit, but nobody else thinks they're a problem. So
Exactly, they think they're cute.
Yeah.
It's Australia. Everything wants to kill you.
It's amazing that rabbits
Not
are a
everything
problem in
can.
Australia, you know, with 9 out of 10 is the most poisonous everything.
Yeah, it's not everything can kill you, but everything wants to. And the other question was next. Yeah?
Actually, there was a horror movie about a beach from Australia.
There's one Blood
in the 70s.
Beach. Blood Beach.
Was
Is
that
that the one where the
Nicolas,
sand is sucking them down?
I can't remember.
the Nicolas Cage film that's just come out called The Surfer?
Surfer.
Very horrifying. Yeah.
It is a very basic question, so feel free to skip it and just ignore me. But how do you feel as writers that you're creating people that will just suffer? So, okay, this person is created just to die, suffer, and then this is the start of the story, right? Or even some people who are suffering and they are suffering because of ghosts or whatever. Maybe this is adding some layer of ethical or trying to be a good person, but okay, it doesn't matter because I'm writing a book. This does nothing. This has nothing to help with how I am as a person. So writer and person are two different people. So what do you think about this part?
Well, I mean, okay, sometimes you will come up with something in a book, or at least for me, with Vampiros, where I knew something, suddenly I knew something horrible was going to happen to one of the characters. And I felt very bad for them, but tough luck, man, this is the job, you know? But what really gets you in trouble, no one cares about the people. Maybe you were the only person, which I admire very much. What people care about are the animals. I killed a dog in my second book. I just got an email in August from someone telling me they'll never read my book again because I killed this dog. And I always wanted, and this got mentioned at a panel once, and people booed me. I made the mistake of saying, it's not a real dog. They didn't want to hear that. I will never kill a dog again. It's really trouble.
This is very true. There's a book I wrote called Unraveler, and I actually kill quite a lot of people in the book. To be true. I have people being sort of horribly eaten by a man-eating horse and things like that. Everyone's fine with that, but I have one character describing her memory of something bad happening to some cygnets. And my editor was like, "Whoa! We need to tone that down." So yes, there's definitely if animals are involved, then yes, it makes a big difference.
What was the animal?
Cygnets, baby swans.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
I was, when I was starting out, I mean, it was like a year into the first book had come out, I did my first crime. convention. I did my first Crackers Normal Ad News Nights, which is a crime convention, and I looked out onto this room full of women of a certain age with blue rinse hair, which was a bit of a surprise to me because I thought blue rinse hair was a stereotype. But nope, there they were with their blue rinse hair. And I call them my gruesome grannies, and they read serial killer books. And I realised they like me because because in the first book lots of horrible things happen to people in a kind of gruesome way. So now I try and put at least one horrible, gruesome death just for them. So it's their fault. I blame them.
That's why you wrote Blue Rinse Death.
That's why I had someone burning out from the inside out, because I thought they'd really go for that.
They asked Keanu Reeves about the puppy in John Wick, and the interviewer said, well, you kill about 300 people in the movies, but you're concerned about one puppy. And he said, well, the puppy is innocent. None of us is innocent. Well, we don't have time for anything else. They are going to be signing their books now. Well,